Qualified.
Well, he loves his teacher. Actually, mother both in the students. George. Yeah. I mean, I
Oh, I asked my dad. My dad's gonna teach me. But like,
I'm looking at her friend at the shop.
oh really?
Yeah, she just watching stuff.
that's nice.
I don't know, maybe we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, I got an old family, so everything was right. That's what I like about
So
it.
we've got.
What year is your camera?
It's 98.
Yeah, that's an old camera.
Yeah, it's older than I am. It's older than me too. Yeah, I got it from my cousin. For free. It was like they were
Skill negotiator right here.
they were about to like send it to the junkyard, and my dad and I went, now we can fix it.
Did you mostly go on Care.com?
Yeah.
I'm like touching on the K, but
Everyone's on there.
I mean, so like,
There's no filter.
my cousin bought it before me. It did. It's like horrible. You have to like get like fabric cleaners.
having your car, you want food, and I was like, such a luxury. It's like, I was thinking of taking her where she went.
It was stolen lifestyle.
It's gonna be a lot of
My kids aren't quiet, the dogs aren't quiet. I was like,
nothing about this job is fire.
I heard of it. Yeah.
This year I went to
I just bought it. I bought it.
I want you to see that.
I live in town.
Yeah. Well, I drove a
This is a perfect job for me. So
I always joke about it.
it's not a good job for me.
That's kind of what happened. I need to change.
I knew you could. Go there.
Like
Right? Yeah.
every week. So I'm like.
All right, everybody. We're going to get started. I'll just make the sign of the cross since we prayed already upstairs, and we'll jump right in. For as many of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is no male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus, and if you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise. What book of the Bible is that from? Raise your hand if you know. Oh. No, good guess. Good guess. Right author, wrong book. All right. Okay, that's good to know. What's that, Ryan? Yes, it is. Galatians. You better know that, Ryan. Okay, yes, Galatians. And actually, we quote a part of that section just before it. As many of you as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. Well, actually, yeah, right at the beginning of what I just said. As many of you as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. We sing this as we go around the font during the baptismal service. And Paul here is saying that gender doesn't matter. That's what he's saying, right? He's saying that in Christ there is no male or female, right? So there's no difference between a man or woman, and if you want to change your sex, go right ahead, no problem. That's not what Paul is saying. I hope that you know that I'm not agreeing with that idea. So I do want to explain what Paul does mean, but I also want to open with that verse because it kind of, on the face of it, does seem like, well, hey, our spiritual selves transcend gender, so what if you get a sex change or reassignment or whatever you call it? So what? First of all, what does Paul mean? What's he talking about? Why is he listing these things? Neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free, there's no male and female. He's actually using the precise phrasing of Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, where he says, made him male and female. Male and female he made them, right? Paul's whole argument in this book of Galatians, and that's why it's important where it comes from, Paul's whole argument in the book of Galatians is circumcision is not necessary for you to become a Christian. You don't have to get circumcised. God worked through the Jewish people. They were his people. He superintended the whole thing with the law to create like this safe space, this zone in which Christ could come into the world, into a broken, corrupt world. But now that Christ has come, all of those kind of conditions that were laid out by the law, circumcision being one of them, which actually did precede the law, but circumcision being kind of part of that bubble is no longer necessary. And so actually, what he's doing, he's going through every distinction that circumcision makes. What does circumcision distinguish between? It makes a Jew from amongst the Greeks, from amongst the Gentiles, the nations. So it makes a distinction. Circumcision makes a distinction between slave and free. If you actually go to the verses in Genesis chapter 17, in which God establishes circumcision for Abraham, he says, if there are slaves in your house who are not Jewish, but slaves in your house, they must be circumcised. Free men, though, living among you, like people from Babylon who have come down and migrated, they live among you, they're nice people, they're your neighbors, but they don't have to be circumcised. So there's a distinction in the rite of circumcision between slaves and free people, like in the text. And there's a distinction between male and female, of course. Only men get circumcised. With all of these, there's no distinction in baptism, and this is precisely Paul's point. There's no distinction between any of these things in baptism. We are all received into the life of Christ. Male and female, slave and free, Jew and Greek, all of us are received into the life of Christ. All of us are Abraham's offspring. So he's distinguishing largely between baptism and circumcision, not between transgender ideology and, right-wing conservatism. But I do want to say something about us as human beings and gender and all that stuff, because actually of all of the streams of Christianity, Orthodoxy could appear to be the most sympathetic to kind of a idea that really our real selves transcend gender. We have people, we have saints who talk about I'll read a quote for you. This is John of Damascus, pretty important saint, pretty important teacher. The increase and multiply of Genesis 1, where God says, go forth, fill all the earth, increase and multiply. The increase and multiply does not mean increasing by the marriage union exclusively, because if they had kept the commandment unbroken forever, God could have increased the race by some other means. So what he's basically saying is there wouldn't have been sex and recreation through sex if Adam and Eve hadn't sinned. That's what John of Damascus is saying. And so God would have increased the race by some other means. But since God, who knows all things before they come to be, saw by his foreknowledge how they were to fall and be condemned to death, he made provision beforehand by creating them male and female and commanding them to increase and multiply. So what John of Damascus is basically saying is saying the only reason why there's a distinction between men and women, there's the only reason why there's male and female is because of the fall. This is something God did beforehand, made us male and female before the fall, but knowing that we would fall. See, if he knew that we weren't going to fall, he would have made us not male and female, made us some other way, some maybe like united being from like Plato's Symposium. So we have there's like this figure that is like men, and basically the idea in the Symposium is that men and women were created together and then they were cut in half, which is not unlike what the Greek of the Genesis account is, where the woman is taken from his side, and it's almost like he's cut in half, and then they need to be united again. This is the image of one of the interlocutors in the Symposium says that basically men and women need to be united again into like one big ball, and then we're our true selves. We are completed, in the words of Tom Cruise. Okay, so it seems like in the Orthodox world, and actually this is just one. John of Damascus is like the least far out there. Like Gregory of Nyssa, he's pretty far out there. He's like talks about transcending gender. Maximus the Confessor seems like he does the same thing. That like our spiritual selves transcend gender. So there is a real stream in Orthodoxy of this, and I'm not going to try and like swim against the current here. It's the stream that's in the Orthodox Church. So there it is. So what do you do with this? So there's a real self that somehow transcends gender. The gender is somehow maybe a product of the fall. What's interesting about this, and there's a good little book that I've given away like 3 or 4 times, and so I don't have it now, written by Benjamin Cabe. He's just like a MDiv student from St. Tikhon's, but he really looked into this, read a lot of texts, compiled things well. I can't remember the name of it even, but his name is Benjamin Cabe, C-A-B-E, and it's probably the only thing he's written. Actually, I think he does Trisagion films, if you've ever seen those online. I think he's the guy behind that. And it's the soul and gender, something like that. He notes that our life in our body is important to us, and we are going to be raised in the body. And maybe there won't be male or female in the resurrection. Maybe not. Who knows? Maybe there will be some way in which our spiritual bodies will be beyond whatever provision for corruption God had made. Nevertheless, being embodied right now, each one of us, there's like an imprint. The way we live out our life through our body is a little bit different. And we live our life as a man or as a woman, and that has an effect on our soul and on the way our soul is shaped. It's not just, what I'm trying to communicate to you is that it's not like as we grow in perfection, we all arrive at this same exact point where we all look the same. That's not the way things are. God made us each unique. And as we grow and develop, like we grow into perfection, and there's something about perfection that we all share in, but it looks different in each person. And so the way that we've lived out our life and struggled towards Christ and struggled to be united with him in our particular bodies, your particular body, Kudus, your body is very different than like Elise's. Just different people, right? We're all, every one of us, different people. The way you struggle in your body has an imprint on your soul. And so it's not like you're somehow going to transcend that. So there's still, even in your soul in the resurrection, some way in which your gender has shaped you, has marked you, and your life of being an engendered body has shaped you. And so our resurrected bodies will somehow bear that out. How that will be, I can't say. I don't know. but somehow it will bear witness to the way of which we've struggled in the body, and it's particular to whether you're male or female. It's just like how Christ has holes in his hands, right? He has a wound in his side. It is not bleeding and making him weak, okay? His wounds are all testimony to what the life that he has lived, and that it's testimony to his humility, to his having laid aside the Godhead in order to be united with us even unto death, a death of suffering, right? That's what these wounds are. They're testimony to that. And so he bears in his body the marks. Actually, as St. Paul says in the end of Galatians. And so we will bear in our bodies, in our resurrected bodies, the same marks. And they're going to be related to who we are right now. Does that make sense? All right. So I jumped right in there, like to this controversial topic. To be honest, I kind of think that maybe we are, God willing, kind of at the waning end of that movement. Of course, people who got into that movement are stuck, and will forever live with kind of whatever's been done. But I think we're beyond the point where we're really, as a culture, like stumping for, you need to, maybe you're not a man or a woman, maybe you're really the opposite of whatever you are, or maybe, I think we're coming to the end of that, thank God. But it still has a little bit of ways to play itself out, right? And there are still ways in which it gets expressed a little bit after the fact, like in a conservative place like here. So we'll probably see more. We already have, at least a couple people who that's part of their story. Probably we'll see more as a church. We need to be gracious. We need to be welcoming. We need to make sure that, but at the same time, and so we need to be friendly. At the same time, I had somebody who said, I'd like to be a catechumen. I said, well, look, here's the prayer for making a catechumen. There's a name. If I came to your house on the 8th day, probably wouldn't have given the same, your parents wouldn't have given the same name that you're giving me. All these he's and she's in here. How are we going to work through this? We need some time. It's really complicated out there, and there's a lot of confusion out there about who we really are, and about how we can be safe in the world. Sometimes people just want to be another gender because they're like, it's awful being a woman. I don't want to be looked at by men like that. Or it's awful being a man. Like, they're just weak. I want to be a woman. Whatever. It's a mess out there. And these things that we encounter are a result of a world that is really hurting. And so we do not need to be proud and dogmatic in these moments. We need to be welcoming. But we also need to say, look, who you are is expressed most fully in Christ. Follow him. Don't try and go within and look at like, well, I like race cars and backhoes, and I must be a man. Or, I like ballet, I must be a woman. Instead, seek Christ. Usually, everything else will fall into line. Usually, oftentimes, it's just that you're struggling. You need a group of people around you who are just going to love you for whoever you are. So, you see this borne out in the saints. So in the church upstairs, we have a lot of different classes of saints. And actually, when I am preparing the communion, I take these little there are 9 particles actually of bread, and I put them on the discos. The discos is just like a plate, a metal plate, right? And I have the lamb. It's a square, and it says ICXC Nika, Christ, Jesus Christ, conqueror, Nika. Okay, so that is the piece that I'm going to break up and put into the chalice and use for communion. But then over on this side, there's a big triangle, and that represents the Theotokos. Okay, and I say a prayer when I'm cutting it out. And when I'm putting it next to the lamb, I say, "The queen stood at thy right hand, arrayed in a robe of gold, adorned in varied colors." And it's a quotation from the Psalms. Not there. And then over on the other side, I put 9 smaller triangles, all in kind of rows. Each of those triangles is for a different rank of saints. So the first one I put down in the Antiochian tradition is for the supreme commanders or the bodiless powers. It's for the angels. Okay, I'm going to gloss over that one. The next one is for St. John the Baptist and all the prophets. Okay, particularly the prophets are at least the ones that we name in this: John the Baptist, Moses, Aaron, Elijah and Elisha, David, Jesse, the 3 holy youths, and Daniel. Okay, these are the prophets that we're naming. Of course, you know, if you look in that's not like the 12 minor prophets. It's not even the 4 major prophets necessarily. Daniel's in there. And some of them were definitely prophets, like Elijah and Elisha. But like David, you don't usually think of him as a prophet. However, we often talk about him as a prophet because so many of his psalms point to Christ. So a prophet is one who points to Christ, particularly through his words. And even Jonah, terrible prophet, was a prophet because he pointed people to Christ. He, of course, didn't say the name of Christ, but even in himself, in what he went through, 3 days in the belly of a whale, that we look at that, we say, that's an image of Christ in Hades. 3 days in the tomb. Just the way he lived out his life was a life of what was prophetic. It pointed to Christ. Just what happened to him, not even how he chose to live out his life. What happened to him showed forth Christ. John the Baptist, though, of course, through his words, very particularly, pointing to Jesus Christ himself, the man who had come, the God-man who had come, pointing to him. So, prophets, they have a particular charism. They have a particular way of being. Not all saints are like super holy men. A lot of those prophets that we named were particularly notable for their holiness. Not Jonah. Not Jonah. Not a holy man. Still, though, considered a prophet. Having the bearing witness to God, even in this strange way. Not all prophets do healings, right? They don't. Every saint just shows forth a little piece of Christ. They don't show forth the whole Christ. Only Christ shows forth the whole Christ, right? His life in us, though, kind of is expressed in a particular way, particular to us. And that's why I'm kind of going through these ranks of saints to show that, you know, Christ's life is, in him, it's completely full. But in each of his saints, it's just like a glimmer. And that glimmer can be really powerful. It can be like blindingly bright. It's still just a glimmer of the glory of God in Christ. Prophets. Apostles is the next one. Apostles Peter and Paul, the 12, the 70. Jesus sent out 70 apostles. Many of them became deacons. Of the 70, all the holy apostles and equals to the apostles. Equals to the apostles. Mary Magdalene. She is known as the apostle to the apostles. Nina of Georgia. She was oftentimes people who bring the gospel for the first time to a place are called the equal to the apostles. So Nina, a woman, brought the gospel of Christ to the people of the Republic of what is now the Republic of Georgia, and so she's known as the equal to the apostles. So we're praying for them. What are these? These are people who are sent, just like Christ was sent, right? He was sent from the right hand of the Father to us, to a dying world. The apostles, that's what that word apostle means, sent. The apostles were sent out. Are you all freezing? Okay. I'm going to turn a little heat on. I'm Okay. So the apostles are sent out and they bring the glad tidings to the world. And they establish churches, right? Many of them do miracles. I mean, Paul, we'll talk about this in a minute, his handkerchief touched people and healed them. But he wasn't particularly known as the guy who you go to if you need to be healed. There are other saints for that. But he was the one who would go out and establish churches. That was his particular charism. Like, do you know that word? Charism? Like spirit. Like his the way in which the Spirit filled him to do good works, to do the will of God. All right. After prophets and apostles, there are hierarchs and ecumenical teachers. Usually in the Orthodox Church, the people who are given the task or the power to teach are the bishops, the hierarchs. And sometimes underneath them, the priests. So Bishop Thomas lets me talk to you all. But he and the Metropolitan especially, and then the Patriarch, are kind of the keepers of what the faith is. Okay? So hierarchs and ecumenical teachers. Christ, of course, came. We have the Sermon on the Mount. It's like, if you try and memorize the Sermon on the Mount, it's like, 3 chapters long, right? In Matthew. But he was known as a teacher. Mary Magdalene, when he rises from the dead, she says, Rabboni, that's a familiar name for rabbi, teacher. That's what she says to him. He's known as the teacher. So some people are given the charism of being teachers. Cyril the Great, we talked about him. Or actually, Nicholas, like the hierarch among hierarchs. He was at the First Ecumenical Council. What did he do with Arius? Punched him in the nose, right? Pow! Not the picture of peace. Not like Seraphim of Sarov or, Herman of Alaska. All the animals come to him. Like, just what we think of when we think of a saint, right? St. Nicholas is not what we think of when we think of a saint. Think of, like, big chubby guy. Like, go on a diet, buddy. Like, what I'm saying is, every saint has a different way of being, right? A different power that God gives him. It's just a small expression of Christ's power. After hierarchs and ecumenical teachers, we have martyrs. Okay, a martyr, that word martyr just means witness, right? You're witnessing to Christ. And we talked a bit about this last time when we talked about marriage. But a martyr, usually, somebody who dies a bloody death, is witnessing to Christ's death. And so they are given the grace, or given the dispensation. I don't know what the word is. They're allowed to suffer for Christ. Not everybody suffers for Christ. Okay? And so they show forth Christ, his humility, his suffering in the body unto death. Martyrs. Ascetics. Okay? Christ also went out into the wilderness, right? And he did battle with the devil for 40 days. And didn't eat anything, didn't drink anything. At the end, he was very hungry, it says. And it just says he didn't eat anything. He might have drank something, right? So then, ascetics, Anthony the Great is a great example right there. Goes out into the desert, fights with demons, nearly dies, but in so doing is transformed. So they are dying to themselves. This is the class where we often think of like monks. Oh, you're such a saint because you have died to yourself. They don't die necessarily in the body like the martyrs, but they die to their self in their passions. This is where we mostly think of as like a saint. But I'm trying to communicate to you, it's not just that area. It's not just ascetics. It's all of these. Basil the Great, I don't think was a great ascetic. He was a great teacher. He was a great administrator. I think he got grumpy. I think his passions got the best of him sometimes. It's not good. He needs to be purified of those. But God fills us in different ways. Okay. The last class, there are a few other things that we say, but the last major one is wonder-working unmercenary healers. So these are saints, actually like Julian of Homs. He was a martyr, but he was also a physician. Usually physicians, Christian physicians, would heal people for free. Sometimes they would use just regular medicine, and sometimes it was kind of miraculous healings. And oftentimes it was that way. Because sometimes, a doctor's able to cure you, and then other time with, just, I don't know, cutting your arm off and cauterizing it, good to go. But then other times, you really need miraculous healings. And God would work through these people who devoted themselves to God, refused to take money for what they were doing. That's why they're unmercenary. Refused to take money, and then and God would work through them. Okay, those are the main classes of saints. The other little triangles that I cut out, one's for the ancestors of God, Joachim and Anna. Actually, I should mention them. They didn't really necessarily do anything to become ancestors. They were born ancestors of God. But all of life, all of the kind of the Jewish world had been superintended to the moment when Joachim and Anna, and then Mary was born. And so there's some special way in which they show forth the work of God, Christ in the flesh. Christ in the flesh, ancestors of God. And then we have one for, we also have one for the hierarch, or the person whose liturgy we're serving. So that's the 9th little particle if you were counting particles. Any questions or comments about that? All right. Yes. Go ahead, Ryan.
So I guess when we like on like feast days and stuff, and I guess like to like Mary, we like sing hymns like to the saints and stuff like that. Or,
Yeah.
I guess because like whenever I talk to my part of my friends, it's like the number one thing. Like it's like it's something I really. So like I guess what would you say? Like how are we to like understand that, and like how do we understand like the flowery language? And,
Okay. Yes. Oh, I just said tonight, Most Holy Theotokos, save us. Most Holy Theotokos, save us, right? That's pretty, like, galling. So, let me get there. What I want to say, though, is, let me jump to icons and then come back to saints, okay, and answer your question. The reason why I wanted to put icons in this group, too, is because when we venerate an icon, we are venerating the person. Like, let's say it's St. Nicholas, or an event in the life of Christ, or the Theotokos. We are venerating the image of Christ that is shining forth in that person. So, as I said, it shines forth in different ways, and so there's a very particular way when we venerate this icon over this icon, or this saint over this saint. The presence, we believe that the presence of the person is somehow there in the image. We can talk about all of these kind of like why we believe these kinds of things. It actually was not a strange idea in the antique world. Neither was kissing each other on the cheek or kissing things. Not a strange thing. People would do it all the time. So it's kind of a cultural thing, if you can think of it that way. We think of it as like, oh, that's idol worship. But they are just like, well, we just kiss everything. What do you mean it's idol worship? But when we kiss an icon of a saint, we are venerating. I'm going to say something. We often make a distinction between veneration and worship. In English, we have a nice distinction there, and we usually say worship is for God alone, and veneration is for icons and this kind of thing. But just so you're not caught off guard, many Greek texts don't make any kind of distinction between veneration and worship like we do in English in the West. Like they'll say, worship this icon and so on. Latria. Usually not. Usually there is kind of like this over here, but you can find it. We worship you. It's O Theotokos or something like this. sounds like completely outrageous. Yes, we only worship God. Let me just say that first and foremost. That's why I want to make sure I know that you know that when we are kissing an icon, we are venerating the image of Christ in that person. But it's also like, it's like more complex than that, because just like if you, this is always the image. If you're a soldier, you take a picture of your family out to war with you. You kiss your kids goodnight on the picture, and your wife goodnight. Hopefully, you kiss her goodnight too on the picture. And like you don't think that you're worshiping the picture. You know that it's the person, the people that you love, and you're expressing your love in like kissing the picture. But it's not enough. You want them to be there. But there is some way in which that picture represents them or brings them to you. Icons are more than that. They're not just like kind of bring to mind and it becomes a thing that you can interact with, so that it's not just in your mind. It is more than that, where there's actually the presence of that saint there. We believe that there's actually somehow the presence of that saint in those icons. That's why if icon falls on the floor, you pick it up and you say, you kiss it, right? That's like you're saying, I'm sorry. Sorry I dropped you on the floor. You can take this to an extreme. Please don't. You could like, people, this isn't necessarily an extreme, but people are very concerned in the modern era, in which there's like icons printed everywhere. Many churches have icons on their bulletin, and then you're just like, what am I supposed to do with this? Is this really like a representation in some way this person is present here, and then I just throw it in the trash? Like, what do I do with this? It becomes very complicated. That's why we don't have icons on our little bulletins. But you probably can go crazy trying to like find every icon that might be somewhere. I mean, I do put my calendars that have clear icons on them in the burn barrel, in the sacristy. There's a little thing. My sons every now and then take it over to my house and have a little bonfire. So like that's how you dispose of holy items that you're not using anymore. So like this is an icon of this saint, and it has been in my you hang it up. You look at it for a month. You kind of have like developed a relationship with the saint there. Probably not gonna just toss it in the trash. But looking through some materials that you got from Sunday school to see if there's a little icon on it. Don't drive yourself crazy, okay? Like while we do believe that there's the presence of the saint there, we also kind of recognize like things are just in the hands of God. At some point, you just have to say, I can't spend my whole life trying to find icons and dispose of them properly. You could spend your whole life doing that. Please don't. Okay. So, with that in the background, you were asking. Oh yeah. Okay. So we say, "Most Holy Theotokos, save us." I do want to talk about the Mother of God a bit more, but I'll go into this a little bit. We often say, "Intercede for us." Let's find some of the most innocuous things we say. They're like, intercede for us. Oh, pray for us, And oftentimes you read Orthodox websites and it's like, or watch Orthodox videos and they say, well, of course, you will go ask your friend to pray for you. Why wouldn't you ask a saint to pray for you? Right? They're just interceding on your behalf. Okay, you can kind of, I can take that step, right? Now, sometimes people talk about the saint actually doing something. Like St. Nicholas, I saw him. He pulled me out of the car just before it exploded. Nobody was there. And he pulled me out of the car, and then it exploded. I know it was St. Nicholas. I saw him. People have these stories, okay? That's not my story. Okay. Now this is getting a little more complicated. Like, okay, well they can pray for you, but now are they like doing things? They're dead. well, is there some way in which like God has allowed them to have activity in the world now that they've died, even though they're dead? That seems a little bit strange, but again, even just Peter's shadow touching somebody would raise them from the dead. That handkerchief that was Paul's, they would pass it around when he wasn't even there. Maybe he could have been dead. Pass it around, people get healed. Some sense in which the power of that person maybe exists beyond the moment when they die. Maybe there's some way in which God still works through the saints that he worked through when they were alive. Maybe so. Of course, we would say it's God doing it. It's God's power. It's not like St. Nicholas's power, but at the same time, if you don't have any food and somebody shows up with like a trunk full of food, they're like, you know what, I was praying and God put you on my heart and I came over and here's some food. There is some way, of course that's God who did that. There's also some way in which they participated in that. It's like, you would say thank you to them, wouldn't you? You'd say thank you. And you would be appreciative, and you'd kind of wonder like, oh, you must have like a special connection with God too. You'd wonder all those things. Even though you know that it's God who made it happen. Okay? So maybe we can go that far. What is this Holy Theotokos? Save us. Come on. Here's what I want to say about this, and then I'll take a question. We do not mean ultimate salvation. Okay? We don't mean keep us from hell. We do tend to talk about salvation when we talk about salvation in earthly terms, like, hey, the barbarians are coming and they're at the walls and they're really big and it looks like they could just like step right over the walls into the city of Constantinople. Holy Theotokos, save us. Oh, there's an earthquake. All of the buildings are shaking. Most Holy Theotokos, save us. These are the kinds of times in which people will say these kind of things, in our hymns and in church history. The Theotokos was seen as particularly the protectress of the city of Constantinople. Different cities had different saints associated with them. Thessaloniki was Saint Demetrius. It's kind of like in the Old Testament. Of course, the Lord of Spirits has gone all through this, so if you've ever listened to anything they've done, you're familiar with this idea. But in Deuteronomy chapter 32, I think it is, the Song of Moses, it talks about basically the number of the nations being apportioned according to the number of the angels in heaven. They're like 70. So each nation gets a superintending angel. Well, many of them accept worship, like to be worshipped as a god, instead of pointing to Christ. Of course, you can say thank you, dear angel. You're marvelous, and I'll even fall down before you. But because in the Old Testament that was allowed. It's only in the New Testament that you can't fall. The angels are like, "Oh, don't fall down before me." God has revealed Himself. Now you fall down before God. But they accepted worship as idols, as gods, and so they fell, and God did away with them. In the kind of Christian age, what you see happening is that these saints take the place as protectors of different places. Okay? So the Theotokos was protectress of the city of Constantinople. So that's why we particularly, and so many of our services are from the Constantinopolitan rite. Now, that actually is not. It's from a monastic rite from Palestine. So take that with a grain of salt. But there is a way in which kind of what happened in Constantinople really affected what happened, how the texts were said, or how the services were said in other places. We're not saying save us from hell, save us from eternal damnation, unite us with yourself, and transform our bodies and our souls. That's not what we're saying at all. when we say Most Holy Theotokos, save us. It's just like, help me pass my test. You know, help this thing stop. Maybe God is using this to purify me and to humble me like Job. So maybe he is. I'm not going to ask him to stop. But maybe, Theotokos, you kind of have an inside picture, and maybe you could put in a good word. Maybe there's some way in which you can make it stop. I don't know. You're a gentle mother. Let's try this. Okay, August.
Is it like okay to venerate icons that are in or related to like a Catholic church or just some like heterodox church?
There is a spectrum because there are some, like there's Byzantine Catholic icons, which basically look like Orthodox icons. If you go into a Byzantine Catholic church, you probably could venerate the icons there. Because it's the presence of the person, not the provenance of the icon. So let's say you order an icon from Monastery Icons, and the Hindu abbot, whoever he is, Hindu Orthodox abbot, sends you an icon that he did a little dance over, and but it's of St. George, or let's say St. George. He's a popular one, and it's exactly the form that you would get from Legacy Icons or Uncut Mountain Press, one of these other places. It just came from this weird place. You can still use that icon. It's the person, and it's their presence that is what matters. Now, I'd say you probably should get it blessed, but even then, it's really the person that matters that's depicted there. So then, okay, you can have icons that are in like a Western style. You can go into Eastern Orthodox churches in Russia, and they've got like these paintings that look like Rembrandt, but they are like icons. I don't particularly like them, but we do. But they are allowed in that church, and they are treated as icons and is somehow showing forth that saint and Christ. So now, then there is like these weird ones. Like for instance, I went into a Catholic church, and Mary is there, standing above everyone. It's a mosaic. Looks almost exactly like our Platytera, where she has her hands outstretched. She's up at the apse at the front of the church, except she's looking up. Interesting, very interesting. That communicates something different when she's at the kind of the height of the church, looking up, than when she's looking down and gathering the people. So these details do matter. Is it not Mary? Should you not venerate it? We'll come back to that, Megan.
I have kind of two questions. The first one is kind of from a practical perspective because I have kids.
Oh yeah.
We don't want to have graven images and this sort of thing, and I understand that there's some way that icons are different than that. But when my son says, "I want to draw a picture of Mary," at what point do I discourage something like that? Like, at what point are we crossing a line? Right?
Yeah.
And the second part of the question is kind of as humans, when we do think, we look for patterns, right? So in church, when we're doing the sign of the cross, as we're talking about, the Holy Trinity or something like that, but then we also do the same sign of the cross when we're looking at a picture. I understand it's like the presence of God, but there's this slippery slope. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So how do you avoid the slippery slope where you have people go, "Oh, Saint Nicholas saved me," and you focus so much on that, and forget where he gets that power from,
Yeah, that's important because I'll be honest. Like, I would hear people who grew up Orthodox talking about Mary, and it's like, that really makes me uncomfortable. Like, are you worshiping Mary? And some of these things I've kind of started to understand. Like, okay, I think this is what's going on there, but it to be honest, this whole thing about, I was like, well, we ask them to intercede for us, but we don't ask them to do things for us. And then somebody was saying, well, a little bit of like the argument I was giving, well, we ask other people to do things for us. We appreciate other people who do things for us. Like, why, if a saint is able to, why would you not like say, oh, you know, this saint did this for me? Okay, I guess there's an argument to be made there. But, you know, I will probably always see orthodoxy from the outside because I converted when I was in my 20s, right? And some of these things do look a little concerning, where I see, like, I don't know, just people wearing tchotchkes like it's jewelry, and there's just kind of a familiarity with things, and or yeah, I mean, maybe they're treating saints like they're part of their family, and of course we are all worshiping God together. But sometimes you wonder, like, are you worshiping God? That's a legitimate question and concern. I guess what I'm trying to say is, it may be that some of the things that are like red flags maybe aren't as bad as they appear on the surface. But that's not to say that there still isn't something wrong. That there isn't just like a complete preoccupation with, well, you know, let me look in my book of saints and I'm going to pray to this saint because I have an eye problem, and I'm going to pray to this saint. At a certain point, you're getting to the place where it's really just about what kind of magic tricks can help you out. Once you're in that territory, you've really lost. You've lost the plot, right? So it is possible to get there. Why would you mess with this stuff if it's possible to get there? Why would you want to raise your children like this if it's possible to get there? Because, like, maybe, you know, we're inoculated because we grew up in a different way, but we're raising our children. They might become like those people who just like want magic to happen for them. I do think that this is where it has to do with how we are formed, just as how we're forming our children, and how we are how we are kind of hoping that we ourselves will be formed, what we're reading and doing. Most people don't. Even those people who like talk about Saint Nicholas and all that, they actually know who God is. They know that they're not actually worshiping. They're a little too intimate with those, but they actually know that there's a difference between the Trinity and the Theotokos. Even though in some traditions you make the sign of the cross when you say the Theotokos' name. Okay, I think they would understand that. Where probably there's mistakes is we become really self-centered, and this is possible for all of us always. You become self-centered and you think that your life is basically the center of the universe, and whatever happens in your life is basically a sign either of God, the hand of God kind of directing you to do the thing that you're doing, or a sign that God has withdrawn himself from you because you are no longer in his favor. And that basically the whole Christian world revolves around you. And that, you know, we're always going to give thanks to God for whatever good things happen. But that almost masks a deep egocentricism that really needs to die. Do you see what I'm saying? So it gets expressed in different ways in different kind of Christian traditions. And it gets expressed in one way in the Catholic tradition, another way in the Protestant, another way in the Orthodox. It gets expressed in all three of them. In all three of them, we can be egocentric and really just want good things to happen for us. And the test is like, really, are you going to lose your faith if bad things happen to you and you can't really give an explanation for why? Are you going to like just turn your back on God if your children, I don't know, leave the faith? Or are you going to struggle and be united with Christ through that struggle? So that's where I think all of the mistakes that we can make are kind of like purged, like chaff. They're like winnowed off. All of the kind of magical thinking, all of the maybe being a little too familiar with the saints, that actually can be winnowed away if we really are devoted to being united with Christ and not shrinking from whatever means he employs for that to happen. I do want to say also, you said something about graven images. In the Old Testament, of course, in Exodus, it says, shall not make graven images, right? In the Ten Commandments. And what's interesting about this is that then a little bit later on, in the book of Exodus, God says, okay, bring me an artisan. I want him to make me some things. Bring me some women who are good with needlework. They're going to make a veil, and then we're going to put these angels, images of these angels on this veil. And this craftsman, he's going to make an Ark of the Covenant. He's going to make graven images of cherubim, and they are on top of the ark. And my presence is going to sit there between the. Make these altar stands, and at the bottom of them, make pomegranates and pomegranate trees. In Ezekiel, there's kind of another. There's a parallel instruction manual for the temple. And it's got all sorts of things: palm branches, lions. When they make the temple, actually in Samuel, they've got images of lions there. So there is, if you just take the Old Testament, like the Ten Commandments, at face value, you could say, well, you would basically be a Muslim, because Jews don't do that. Jews now, you can have Jewish artists. You go to a synagogue and they actually have depictions of like scenes from the Bible. Jews are not anti-image. Muslims are anti-image. They like read the Ten Commandments and like took it to an extreme. The Jews understood it. And so we should not be reading the Bible like Muslims. We should understand like God means there is a distinction that God allows. And yes, if he wanted to be completely safe, he could have just said no images at all. Be like the Muslims. But he understands that there's something about who we are. There's something about kind of the fullness of our beings and his creation that he wants us to be in relationship with. And it does mean that there are some dangers, that maybe you could worship the image of the pomegranate tree or the lion in the temple rather than the God who exists and cannot be seen in the temple. It's possible, but it's pretty unlikely actually. It's more likely that if you're an idolater, you're not going to do your idolatry in the temple. You're going to go out and build a pole to Asherah, like to this false god, and you're going to go worship it. That's what you're going to do. You're not going to like kiss the picture of the lion in the temple and think that that's God. So typically, this is what happens. It's like we come to the church to worship God. We oftentimes will do our idolatry elsewhere. You could do your idolatry in the home, right? You could set up an altar to St. Nicholas and worship him. You could. Probably that's not where your idolatry is going to be happening, though. Probably, maybe you will set up a pole to Asherah, or maybe there's some way in which, like, basically like the transcendentalists of New England, right? Emerson and Thoreau, they ended up kind of moving away from organized religion and made a god of creation. So much that, like, I think we can find real idolatry there in Emerson and Thoreau. I actually really like Thoreau, Emerson, but there is a little. It goes a little far, and I think it does tilt in the direction of idolatry. So I guess I'd say I would watch out there more than like when you're directly kissing things. You probably are actually in safer terrain than in these areas where the rules and kind of the procedures are not as clear. There's more room for something false to come in. I skipped over you, August. Did you want to follow up with anything?
Referring to the Catholic icons, I have a more like specific example.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
There is a Catholic nunnery that I pass often when I walk, and they have a little shrine to I think it's the Holy Family. But regardless, there's a statue of Mary. Sometimes I'll sit there and pray, and I'll see the statue of Mary. I'll just be like, am I allowed to kiss this, or is it like, is Mary not really present in that, or is it just like what do I regard that?
I don't know. I certainly have had experiences like that. Like in Wichita, we would go to this Catholic retreat center, and they had some really. There was some space. There were some like icons which were awful. They were like who's that guy who did the Scream? What's that artist? It was like his icon. It was like he had done a whole bunch of series of icons. It was awful. I didn't even want to be in that space. But then there were some other spaces where it was kind of like, it was, I think, just like this. And yeah, there's a problem with the Holy Family icon. You can see Father Peter here gives some rail against it. But there's Mary. You're praying, like it's contributing to your prayer. Don't flee. I probably wouldn't kiss a statue of Mary and the Holy Family. I don't know. Well, what's interesting is we don't use statues in the Orthodox Church. Sometimes we will have like things in relief so that they are coming out, but we don't typically have statues, and I'm not sure why that is. Jonathan Pajot, I'm sure, has something about that, so you can go look that up. Okay, what's that? We have engravings, absolutely. We have engravings and that kind of thing, but we don't typically have like fully three-dimensional statues. So there's more to be explored there than I can really do justice to. And I know that my children are going to be coming back with your children in 7 minutes, because my children were told that they have a strict bedtime or get back home at 8:30. So I have to be. As human beings, we have a priestly vocation. This is another thing that I want to just say about who we are as human beings. Alexander Schmemann does a really good job of explaining this in many of his books. He died in like the 80s, and great liturgical reformer, although he probably would hate to be described in that way. Liturgical historian. And so he talked about how it is that we offer things. In the Bible, the food man eats, the world of which he must partake in order to live, is given to him by God, and it is given as communion with God. The world as man's food is not something material and limited to material functions, thus different from and opposed to the specifically spiritual functions by which man is related to God. So in some ways, everything is spiritual. If you go too far down that road, though, nothing is spiritual. Like, if everything is filled with the grandeur of God, and it is, then nothing is too. Like it's hard to really keep ourselves like walking around like, God, right here, and this table is somehow participating in the presence of God. It is, actually, it is. I think I gave a sermon on that once even. Like, but to walk around with that kind of awareness, it's just not viable for us. Okay, we do just as human beings have to like be able to turn off a little bit. Say, okay, well, I'm in a more special kind of dedicated place in the church. And now I'm in the basement of the church, and it's different. There's something different's going on here. All that exists is God's gift to man, and it all exists to make God known to man, to make man's life communion with God. This is Alexander Schmemann. And so on. It is divine love made food, made life for man. God blesses everything he creates, and in biblical language, this means that he makes all creation the sign and means of his presence and wisdom, love and revelation. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. The basic definition of man is that he is the priest, not just me. Right, the priesthood of all believers. He is the priest. He stands in the center of the world and unifies it in his act of blessing God, of both receiving the world from God and offering it to God. And by filling the world with this Eucharist, he transforms his life, the one that he receives from the world, into life in God, into communion with him. No matter what dominion we're in, whether you're in the home with children, whether you're in the workplace, whether you're sitting in front of a computer, like, there is a sense in which everything that we have is coming, and we receive it as a gift from God, and then we offer it back to God. This is the action of a priest. Okay? This is what we ought to be doing in all of our life. It's what ought to be happening in our hearts. And so that's kind of at the core of who we are as human beings. God has made us all priests in some way. All right. Last page. There are now like mirror streaming icons. It's kind of a weird thing. There were not like mirror streaming icons in the beginning. There would be mirror streaming relics. So St. Demetrius, his bones are in Thessaloniki. You can go see his relics, and they like gush myrrh from time to time. Not all the time, from time to time. Why is it that only sometimes this happens? Only sometimes the myrrh gushes. I was there, I paid, $3,000 to go across to Greece, and it didn't gush. As soon as I left, I heard all about it, and it was gushing. I went to St. Nectarios. I went to him while he was alive, and I asked for him to pray for me, and I had him touch me, and I didn't get healed from my cancer. What's going on? Why did this other person then go and they were barely like Christian, went up to him and he touched them, didn't say anything, and suddenly they're all healed. What is going on here? Why this and not this? Why does God give good things to evil people and allow good people to have evil things? I don't know why. Why is it? I don't know. Jesus didn't heal everybody, right? There were many, many people that he went and touched, and he touched many people and healed many people. There are many people that did not get healed. There are many people who died and he did not raise from the dead. Okay? Why? I don't know why. Why does the icon... So yeah, I was saying that the relics used to gush myrrh, and they still do, but now it's kind of like gushing of myrrh is kind of a sign in many icons now of somehow like the healing presence of God being there. So that's kind of the idea, I think, of the myrrh streaming icons. There's one from Hawaii that comes around sometimes, and you can see it gush myrrh. Like, I don't know why it's doing that. Sometimes you anoint yourself or you get anointed with the oil from that icon. There have been healings, and sometimes nothing happens. God works through things, through people, even through like myrrh from a piece of wood, from an icon. God works through these things. But I think he wants to say, I'm not limited to these things. And it's not just magic. It's not just like this thing. I suppose if we did just every time we touched this icon, we would probably start to worship. If we got healed, we probably would start to worship it. And so maybe God allows these things to kind of have a healing function because they're just really pointing to him. They're leading us to life in him. They're not ends in themselves. So I think if everything were very consistent and logical and laid out, and every time you touch this icon you get healed, there could be some serious problems, like you were saying, Megan. One of the first icons, the icon not made with hands, you can look it up. It's August 16th. It's a commemoration of the oh, there's a long word, and I wish I could pull it out right now, but basically it just means icon not made with hands. And it was said to be a cloth that was sent. It's not the same thing as the Veronica's, as Jesus is going to the cross. In the Catholic tradition, there's Veronica, and she gives him a handkerchief, and he wipes his face, hands it back, and there's his image of his face. It's not that. It's actually this other story where this king from Edessa, he's sick, he's not able to come to Jesus. He sends a letter, and Jesus says, sends him to, puts a cloth up to his face, folds it up, sends it back to him. It says, if you'll be partially healed if you touch this to your face, but then you have to be baptized and then you'll be fully healed. And eventually he is, and he's healed. That's one of the first kind of icons, I guess you would say. St. Luke, the physician and the evangelist who wrote the book of Luke, was known as an iconographer. Sometimes you'll see an icon of him painting an icon of the Theotokos. Lastly, should you have icons blessed? As I said, the presence of the saint is there in the icon just by virtue of it having been done in a way that is canonical. First of all, one good thing about a priest or a bishop blessing an icon is like if there's a new icon, like a hand-painted icon, not just a print, then the priest can look at it and say, that's not canonical. That is not within the bounds. Actually, I have done that before. I had an icon, somebody wanted to put it in the altar. I said, I can't put this in the altar. This is outside the bounds. But usually you can, especially if it's kind of from a reputable place. And if there's no mistakes in it, if it has like the name of the saint and so on, there's kind of some things you look for, I guess. But usually if you're getting it from some of these places, it's going to be fine. You can have it blessed. You can have your icon blessed. I will sprinkle it with holy water 3 times. Say, this icon is blessed. Just sprinkle it with holy water. I would especially say, yeah, okay, if you think that a Hindu abbot did a dance over your icon, probably just bring it to church and we'll bless it, just to be on the safe side. But still, the other way of blessing it could be to leave it in the altar for 40 days, 40 days. So we also do that. We have some icons in the altar. Like maybe if people have different opinions on this. If it's really special, hand-painted icon, you paid like $300 for, then you know the iconographer. Sometimes you'll put it in the altar for 40 days. Sometimes you're like, no way, it's $300. I'm not going to put it in the altar for half a day. I just want you to sprinkle it and I'm going to take it home. So people have different opinions on these things. Does anybody have a question that has not asked a question? I'll go to August.
I've seen, I think it might be more of a Russian thing, but I've seen, like, I guess pendants that have, I've seen ones of Seraphim of Sarai,
Yeah.
where it's a pendant of him, and then maybe like a quote or a Bible verse in the back. Would that be considered crossing the line a little bit?
Like you would wear it?
Yeah.
No, I mean, people, I don't think so. People have icons on bracelets. That's not really my thing. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not ready to criticize it because I haven't really been able to enter the mind of the person who does that. So since it seems to be accepted, I'm gonna accept it until I can really kind of like get in the mindset of somebody who does that. I used to have speaking of St. Nicholas, somebody gave me a little wooden engraving of an icon of St. Nicholas, small thing like this, and I put it on my rearview mirror in my car because St. Nicholas is kind of like the patron saint of travelers. So just like in the West, St. Anthony is like if you've lost anything, pray to St. Anthony to find it. St. Nicholas is like the patron saint of travelers. So there's a lot of Orthodox like kitsch stores you can buy these things. So then I gave it away to somebody else. I don't have anything on my rearview mirror right now. All right. Yes, Ryan, go ahead.
I see like a lot of like my one friend who's Greek Orthodox, and he has like a lot of. I guess this kind of relates to what you just said, like the icons and stuff in their cars. So is there like, like is there certainly like a place we should put icons in relation to our house, and, like where we spend our time?
Yeah. So oftentimes, what people will do is they will sometimes have like an icon in every room, or maybe you have like Ephrosynios, the cook, in the kitchen, and you have I don't know, the baptism of Christ in the shower. I'm kidding. Then you have, but yeah, usually you have like an icon area, and usually it's facing east, and usually that's where you say your morning and evening prayers. So I would encourage you to kind of create a space in your house, yes, where you can, like you have. Yeah.
I just don't have any real icons.
That's okay. Like that's how you do it. Like you kind of just one step at a time. So I'm going to release everybody because I know that there are children next door, but feel free to ask more questions. Thank you, everyone.